Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of MHM. Today, I am so excited. We are joined by many guests, plural guests, because it's our roundtable. It's our end of the season roundtable, and I'm so excited. Very, very excited to chat with these special people that Heather and I know through life and connections. And some of you listeners may recognize some of these names. Speaking of our guests, we have Amber Gordon with us again today, who has been a guest on all three of our roundtables. So we have a legacy roundtable member here. Whoop, whoop, whoop. We have Kitty, who is also part of our last season's end of the season roundtable. And now we are joined by a new guest, Jamie. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Jamie's a first-time guest and joining us for a roundtable, so that's very, very exciting.
Yay! Before we let our guests introduce themselves, just want to recap for our guests and the listeners the movies that we have talked about this season. So in case anyone got this far and doesn't know, we were talking all about self-reflective animation, specifically Disney Pixar. So we've talked about Elemental, Big Hero 6, Inside Out, Turning Red, Encanto, Wreck-It Ralph, Soul, Luca, Incredibles 1 and 2, Coco, Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, Toy Story 1, 2, 3, and 4, Zootopia, Bolt, and then in our other episode, which we technically at the time of this recording have not recorded yet, but plan on talking about Strange Planet, Ratatouille, Monsters, Inc., Up, WALL-E, and A Bug's Life. So a whole library, a whole anthology to cover today. But we have a couple of questions that we had asked in some of those episodes that we are going to re-ask our guests and get their perspectives, which I'm very excited about. But without further ado, let's give our guests time to introduce themselves. So first up, our newbie, I'm going to pick on you. Jamie, welcome. Hi, welcome to MHM.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for being here.
I know Jamie. We met online first via Instagram, and we're connected there. I believe because we both cosplay She-Hulk. That's probably how we got connected via the Instagrams. And then we met in person at conventions because we're both East Coast local gals and run into each other all the time at cons. And basically, Jamie saw that I posted about Soul when I was talking about when I posted about how I was crying for 15 minutes after watching it. And so I thought Jamie, because of that response, would be a perfect guest to have on for our episode of the recap of the season.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
So my name is Jamie. I am a tri-state area East Coast cosplayer and actress. Love Disney, love Pixar. There's so much that I love about it from since like I was a kid to now, and especially growing up in everyone grows up and has to go through things and figure things out, but specifically Disney has helped a lot in that. So very, very excited to be able to talk about it.
Yay.
And we are excited to have you on this podcast to chat about it, especially having like fellow Disney fans and Pixar girlies and all that stuff. So thank you for being here. Kitty, as some of you may recognize or remember, Kitty was on our last season's end of season roundtable, and she's back again. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So thank you, Kitty. Welcome.
Yes, so happy to be back here, back in the LBHB universe. Thanks for having me. For those of you who aren't familiar with me quite yet, my name is Kitty Caveat, pronouns she and they. I work professionally as a licensed therapist, a trauma healing coach, mentor, artist, anti-oppressive community leader. I'm really here to help folks recover from difficult experiences and return back to their true selves, including their true joys and passions. And movies, TV, cosplay, fandoms are such a big part of that. So I'm passionate about my own cosplay, my own movies, my own favorites, and I love this lineup of movies y'all have been talking about this season. I'm so excited to get into it.
Yay! Thank you for being here. Also very excited to have you on. And now for our legacy roundtable member, whoop, 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 Amber Gordon.
Hey everyone, my name is Amber and I am a clinically trained marriage and family therapist. I switched over to the world of coaching around 2020, and now I found my passion with supporting helpers and healers through shadow work, nervous system regulation, helping people to learn how to be more trauma informed and trauma aware, practice more ethically, and create a better space just for everyone who is out there supporting people to do what they do best in a sustainable way that feels good for everybody involved. So that's what I am hanging out doing these days. And I am not a cosplayer, but I have so much respect for it. Grew up doing so much musical theater, and with musical theater, just I feel like comes a huge appreciation for all of these wonderful things, and also just the time, energy, and effort that goes into people who are dedicated cosplayers. I absolutely applaud you. But I sit from the sidelines and just appreciate. And with Disney and Pixar and all those kinds of things, I tell people all the time, like, I am definitely not like a Disney adult or anything like that. But when I am having a rough Friday night and I just really want to like unwind, I am turning on my Disney Plus and I am picking out one of these movies because it's one of those like nice little combinations of you get in your feels, but it's also fun and funny and it brings you back to your inner child. And just watching them as an adult, there's so many powerful takeaways that I feel like I missed. And every time I watch them, I feel like I get whatever it is that I need to get out of it. So that's actually like a really cool thing about these types of movies specifically. I feel like they're very multifaceted and can serve you at different points with different things.
Dang. You just like wrapped up everything HB and I like to talk about, and the reason why we started this podcast. I feel like not necessarily better than we did, but you summed it up very nicely. We have like a 45-minute episode explaining all of that, and you just did it in like 3 minutes. So thank you for that.
I have a defined throat in human design, so that is for anybody who does human design.
There you go. I love it. I love it. So I guess a little backstory too, in case you didn't know, this is LB speaking. I know Kitty and Amber because we were all in the same group coaching program in the late 2020, and we just connected with some other gals, and we have a little group chat, and we've been going pretty strong, you know, connecting with each other, holding space for each other, supporting each other, and it's been really great. And I love these gals so much and everything they do and stand for and just who they are as people, because they're great and amazing. So if you were looking for someone to work with in their respective fields, highly recommend. I've been held by them both and they're amazing and I love them so much. So thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also, Amber, I love what you said about the like not giving Disney adults a bad rep, like not a Disney adult by any means, but I do like what you said about going back and rewatching the movies, because I probably wouldn't be watching these movies if it were not for the purpose of this podcast. And hosting this podcast with LB has been such a gift because I get to do this and talk about movies, and it has been very, very healing and cathartic for me. And like you said, I've gotten exactly what I needed out of every watch. And I think that also says a lot about the lens through which you're looking through life at the time of watching the thing, or whatever it is that you are going through, or the people in your life. And so, yeah, you saying that just like really hit home with me, because it was like, I don't or hadn't done that. Like I hadn't come back to watch these movies for comfort. But now I really enjoy it for the purposes of this podcast, and it's brought me so much. So yeah, that's why we're here. Don't cry, LB.
I'm gonna melt into. I'm wearing Wade's shirt. I'm wearing an elemental shirt for those who can't see, and so I'm gonna channel my inner Wade and just cry about it, because this podcast has meant so much to me as well. For those who don't know, we started recording at the end of 2022. And my grandfather had just passed, and that was a thing. And then literally the month we launched the podcast, my dog died. And so 2023 was a brutal year, but this is not an exaggeration. Like, doing this podcast got me through some really dark times. Not only did I get to watch these movies for comfort, but I also got to watch them through the lens through which we are, analyzing them for the purposes of this podcast. But then I also got to chat about it with not just like one of my best friends, HB, but then we got to do these roundtables with all of these amazing people and have guests on. And it was just really fun connecting with like-minded individuals, and then getting messages from people being like, oh my God, I love the podcast. We had Mallory on last season and she's recommending it to her therapy clients. And like, that's so freaking cool and amazing. And yeah, so also just sharing my gratefulness for this podcast and the people that we've connected through it. So yeah, fun times.
Yeah.
Fun times. The listeners already know mine and HB's favorite movies and characters through listening. So we're going to turn the spotlight over to y'all. Whoever wants to go first can. But what are some of your either favorite characters or movies from the lineup that we have talked about so far? I'll pick on Jamie. Sorry, Jamie, but go ahead.
Actually, I'm probably going to say Mirabel from Encanto, just because, just personally, as a Latina from a family who sometimes didn't feel that special, I felt a very like deep connection with her, and God, that's such a good movie.
It's so good. It's so good. Definitely one of the themes we had brought up while discussing that episode was like what it means to find your role in a family, what it means to be quote unquote special, and how at the end of the day you are worthy of being within your family because you were born into it. And we do have a follow-up question about that though, regarding the grandma's like apology. I don't know, Heather, if we should bring it up now or wait until later.
We can ask it now. Why not? We'll put
Okay.
we can open this up to everyone, not just Jamie.
Yes.
However, the ending of Encanto, obviously, y'all know that the abuela apologizes, right? And so one of the questions that was brought up to us, or something that came up because a lot of people think that the ending of Encanto is unrealistic, that like your grandmother would not ever apologize to you. So we wanted to ask if y'all think that the ending of Encanto is realistic, and even if it's not, or even if it is, like, why was it important for that to be the ending of the movie?
I think that if it's realistic or not, everyone's going to think about their own grandmother or archetype of grandmother, if maybe they haven't had, a grandmother in their life. And I think that that's where people think either it's realistic or not realistic for them. I'm trying to think about this in the lens of like my own grandmother. And I know that like my grandmother is very, very, very English. Like my great grandmother like came over when she was like a late teenager, and in her household, they weren't very affectionate at all. You didn't hug, you didn't kiss, you didn't say I love you. Like it just wasn't like that warm type of affection. So I know my grandmother didn't really grow up with that at all. I know from my mother, that's not really something that she gave as a mother to her children. And then when I came along, I just like hugged and kissed everybody and said, I love you to everybody. And so my grandmother, she would like hug me and kiss me. And she never really said, I love you unless I said it first. And then somewhere along the line, I think maybe when I was like 13, 14 years old, I actually remember being on the phone with her and we were getting ready to hang up the phone. And she said, I love you first. And I was like, whoa, like, and I said to my mom, I'm like, did you notice that my mom has started saying, I love you first? And she's like, yeah, she read The Power of Now by like Eckhart Tolle because Oprah recommended it. And I think she's like really trying to be more present and change. And I think, she knows that she loves us, but it's important now for her to like express it without prompting. So I was like, wow. And so ever since then, she says, I love you. And I bring up that story because prior to that, I probably would have said, yeah, that's like unrealistic to think that like my grandmother would be able to see that and like apologize and shift or change. But then like having that experience, I'm like, yeah, I think maybe she would. So like my experience, I would say like, yeah, that is realistic. And I'm looking at it through the lens of my own grandmother. But I do think that for the purpose of the movie, that had to happen, right? Because so much of it was about the healing of intergenerational trauma. And you can't really have that full circle moment without the abuela being reflective to be able to say like, hey, wow, like I see this. And here's me sitting in ownership of essentially where this trauma started and like why it got handed down through the generations. So I think it was necessary, whether it was realistic or not. And I think whether people agree or disagree is probably going to be based through their own experience of their own family's ability to change.
Yes. Yes. I'm nodding along, and this is actually my favorite movie in the lineup as well. It's such a beautiful film, such a beautiful story, amazing characters, and this film came out after my grandmother passed away. So the matriarch of my family, who is my parent, some of you know, like that was a huge loss for me personally. So I could definitely get more into that side of this, the meaning of this movie, but my mental health perspective is coming through with this question. And I'm reminded of a sentiment that I share with my clients often, both in coaching and in therapy. And something I often say to folks is, you're doing work that many people don't do. Many people don't do. And this is often when people are being really hard on themselves, maybe for like, why didn't I think of this sooner? Why haven't I worked harder at this? Or, you know, I've hurt people or whatever it may be. And that's when I usually come in with the like, yes. And many people go their entire lives without beginning this journey, without even wanting or knowing that there is a journey to be had, that there's an apology to say, that there are traumas to tend to and care for. And that's what I'm reminded of here is often our elders don't do this type of work or haven't traditionally. And we could definitely talk about the societal reasons, the intergenerational trauma, why it's been harder or more difficult to access in this way for our elders. And for our present folks, still, it can be very hard to access. But I think that's beautiful for us to then have an example of an elder coming to these realizations. And just to add a little sparkle in here with another strategy we use, or that I use with my clients, there's a lot of power in imagining this type of apology, right? And so some of you may know this from your own experiences, your own inner work, your own shadow work. But whether or not we receive, say, a verbal apology may not matter so much as if we can energetically know that we are worthy of that we're worthy of that apology, and that we are worthy of the treatment that we deserved, being treated well, being treated with love, being respected. So again, I'm saying our elders may not always get there, and that doesn't mean that we're not worthy of receiving that from them. So I do love having this example to remind us of that.
Damn. I don't think my snaps will pick up, but I'm snapping.
No, I love that you said that, Kitty, because I feel the same way about the energetically. I think that's why it was so important in this movie. Like, whether or not it was realistic or not, there will be people who are watching this movie who were treated the way that Maribel was treated, and getting and seeing the apology might give them something that they would not have otherwise received if they didn't watch this movie, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just got chills as you said that. And, you know, I love to connect to the energy of the collective. So as you say that, I'm feeling how many of us watched those scenes and needed to see that.
Just sobbed all the way through it. Like at the end of Turning Red, sobbed. I was like, I've already said this on the podcast before, but watched Turning Red, not really knowing what to expect. I was like, oh my God, it's going to be cute. It's a little girl that turns into a red panda. No, it's about freaking intergenerational trauma. And at the end, when her mom is like crying and May's realizing, you know, the trauma that's passed down, and they hug and talk, and, you know, the mom apologizes, the grandmother apologizes. And I just remember sobbing like throughout the last 5 minutes of the movie through the credits, and I was just sitting there on the couch, like my boyfriend was like holding me, and I was just sobbing through the whole thing. I think part of it was grief that I may never get that from my mother, who was, as we had discussed in the episode, kind of like May's mom, but definitely more abusive. And then also just like the power of that moment, the power of what that apology or that conversation and the accountability can bring. And like you said, Kitty, or both of you, Heather and Kitty, that we are worthy of it in and of the same, whether or not it is going to happen, whether or not we are actively pursuing that kind of conversation, we are still worthy of those interactions. And I think that's really important to hold on to. And you know, again, just like the both and, we always talk about it on this podcast, there's definitely a both and of like grieving that it may never happen and wanting it, and moving forward through life knowing that you are worthy and you don't necessarily have to wait for an apology, or you don't have to wait to forgive the person that may have harmed you in order to move on and live a very full and fulfilling life. Amber, what about you? Any faves?
So I have a favorite movie and a favorite character. They're not in the same movie. My favorite character is Nemo. Some people who know me personally know this about me, but it's not something like a lot of people know about me. But I do have a lucky fin. I do have a limb difference. I was born with a congenital deformity of my entire left arm. I have had over 27 orthopedic surgeries at this point. I just had a shoulder replacement in December, and you know, she's here and she does the best that she can, but she can't do as much as my other hand can. And I have a lot of limitations as a result of that. There's a lot of things that I either cannot do or I need to find a way to do them differently. So Nemo is a little bit of my hero, and it was very interesting because the way that Nemo was essentially taught to handle his limb difference was very similar as the way that like I was taught. My parents didn't really make a big deal about it, which was great. I was kind of just challenged to like, if I couldn't do something the way that somebody else was doing it, to find my own way of doing it. And, you know, if I was getting frustrated, my parents would just kind of be like, hey, you got it. You're going to have to figure it out. Like, this is just you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just different and you'll find your unique way of doing things. So yeah. So Nemo is like my little fishy friend. Love, you know, the Lucky Finn connection there. And my favorite movie is Soul. I am a very spiritual person. And I actually, this is a little bit of a content warning for people. I am going to be talking about pregnancy loss just for the next couple minutes. So if that is something that is not in a good place for you, maybe skip ahead for this. But I had just gone through a miscarriage and I was recovering from that. And that was the first time I watched Soul. And it wasn't on purpose. I just wanted a movie and it was something I hadn't watched. And like I said, I turned to Pixar when I want something that's going to be comforting yet not void of emotion. And it ended up being such a powerful message for me in that time. And oh my gosh, I cried like the most cathartic cry. I was just but it was just so uplifting and healing. And so that movie is going to forever hold a very special place in my heart. And I do feel like I was gifted that movie at the time that I really did need it, because it had been out for a little while before I watched it. It was just one that was on the Disney Plus that I hadn't seen yet. And that was the one I decided to watch and was exactly what I needed.
Wow.
Dang. I was gonna say I love when those like synchronicities happen where the right thing finds you when you need it. And also I wanted to acknowledge that like what you were going through was really sad and hard, and doesn't always make it better, but it is nice when the universe will send those little winks or little glimmers or however you want to look at it, of just like, go keep you afloat, keep
and
you
it's
going.
nice when it can come in the form of a Pixar movie. So we love that.
Right.
Amber, do you mind if I ask what was so healing about watching it? Like, was there anything specific, or if that's not comfortable to answer?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Essentially for me and in my personal belief system, it helped me to feel like, you know, I personally believe that our souls are energy, and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And so it really helped me to feel like there wasn't a complete loss, in the sense that yes, the physical vessel was not going to be coming to fruition at that time, but it helped me to feel in my heart and in my soul that the spirit of, that child is unharmed and, going to be coming to earth, whether it's, with me or with somebody else, but they're going to get their chance to come to earth, when the time is right for them. And that was just really powerful for me to have that peace, knowing that, like, if there's a soul that's meant to be here, there's nothing that's going to, like, keep that from happening, and that there's a separation, at least in my mind, from kind of like what happens physically and then what happens on the other side. I also really appreciated just the depiction of like the little souls like learning, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe they just needed like a little bit more soul school, like before they came here. So it just kind of helped it to be not such a heavy and tragic final type of thing. Gave me a lot of hope.
That's
I was
really
tearing
beautiful.
up as you were talking about it because, you and I have spent many, many hours together virtually, but I feel like I know you on a soulish level. And I was replaying the movie in my head as you were talking about it. And I was just like, damn, I'm never going to look at the movie the same way. I'm just going to see all these little baby souls up there excited to get to Earth at some point. Yeah. It's very sweet.
If I may say, Amber, I love that you shared that with us, and thank you for really highlighting a film that can be considered quite different for this realm of children's film, like, if you will. And the existential nature, which, as some of you may know, is right up my alley. One of my monikers is the existential witch. So films like Soul, films like Coco as well, where we're presented with a paradigm to help us understand death, what life, right? The concept, the essence of energy, of personhood, reincarnation, these pieces that are often so taboo, or depending on the, say, religious lineage you may come from, they can be like quite harmful in the way they're presented to adults, or very like all or nothing. And my mind goes to my history of growing up in a Baptist community where it's like scary. We're scared. And it's scary to think about these concepts, especially as children, right? We're talking ultimates, heaven, hell, eternal damnation, right? And then to be able to be presented with these concepts in a way that's beautiful artistically and gentle, like in Soul, I feel like, again, we need that. And I absolutely wish I had that as a kiddo. And I'm so happy we get that now.
Mm-hmm. Just going back to Jamie, you briefly mentioned how Encanto is one of your favorites because Mirabelle, and you relate to her a lot in the whole like feeling special. But I was hoping you could chat a little bit more about some of those takeaways for you. Like, did you feel like the Grand Abuela's apology was realistic or not, if they should have included it in the movie or not, etc., etc.?
So I unfortunately, I grew up, I never knew either of my grandmothers. So while I know there's generational trauma that my mother had unfortunately passed on to me, I'm not really sure where she had gotten it from. However, growing up, my mother has changed so much from when I was a kid to where she is now. And I remember there was a big part of my teenage years where, like, I didn't want to listen to her. She, like, there was a lot going on with her and me. And I remember once when I was in my either early 20s or late teens, where I finally just like had it. And I was like, I can't stand the judginess. I can't, like, this isn't working. And I think at that point she had mellowed down a lot, but I did receive an apology from her. And we've had like the greatest relationship since then. So I do believe it is realistic. It just requires a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you were able to get that, because I know a lot of people really, 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 really want it, and for reasons they may never, or it comes much later in life, you know, whatever life things may come our way. But it's really inspiring and really hopeful as someone who does not have a good relationship with their mother to hear that. And I'm really happy for you, because I think I just think it's really beautiful and hopeful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also want to add a little caveat to that too, where is that people can change both for the better and for the worse.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you do get that apology and you do mend a relationship, and then something happens that like breaks it again. And so it's, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, but mine is my relationship with my father. And I also just want to remind anyone who's listening, who may be feeling the way that I'm feeling, that, you know, these things are not linear. It's not an upward trajectory to the apology, to the healing, to the good relationship. Like, relationships are difficult and they take work and they're cyclical, and it's not like one day, you know, it's not like the ending of a movie, right? You don't get that pretty bow wrapped at the end of it with a person who you're in a difficult relationship with. Like, you might get an apology and it might feel good and it might be what you needed, but the relationship still continues after the movie is over. And if you are closer to where I am with my relationship with my dad, you might be feeling a little like, oh, but then that apology was not followed by changed behavior. And then that's where things get a little more complicated. So I just wanted to add that little caveat on for anyone who might be feeling like, yeah, sure, maybe there's an apology, but that's where I'll pull back in what Kitty said earlier about knowing that you were worthy of that apology and taking that energy with you further into the universe and into the world, not necessarily how this person treats you, but knowing that you're worthy of that apology and showing up with the energy that you are deserving of being treated better.
Yeah. And it's so valid to want that, right? It's so valid to want someone who harmed you to take accountability for their actions. And it's perfectly okay and normal to be angry about it. Like, even before you can get to the grieving part, it's okay to be angry. Like, I spent most of my teenage years and my early 20s just being angry because I was mad. I was mad having so many friends who had great relationships with their parents, and they were their best friends and they did everything together and they were so supportive. And then also growing up in an environment where all of the adults in my life were like, you know, you got to listen to your parents. They're the adult, they know best. Or, oh, that's just how she is, and I'm sure she loves you and she's just showing it in different ways, and blah, 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 blah. And it was really frustrating. So I also want to validate that experience. And if anyone's, you know, curious, I am in a position, or I have been for a couple years now, where I am not waiting on an apology anymore, because to me, it felt like waiting on apology from my mom was letting her still have power over me and my life and my healing and my journey. So I have acknowledged our relationship, and she is the person that she is. And if she changes and is trying to grow and be a better person, cool, good for her. But I'm no longer waiting. I think I especially because, as a lot of you know, I'm a perfectionism recovery coach because of my experience. And so much of that was like waiting to be happy until X, Y, and Z, waiting to live my life until I got the degree, got the job, got the perfect boyfriend, got the perfect apartment, whatever. And so all of those things kind of like collided into each other around the same time, at like one point of me feeling like I just have to move forward and live my life however that's going to look. And I'm no longer going to wait for the quote unquote right things, or the things that I expect, or the things that should be happening to happen before I can live. And so anyway, that's just my personal take. And that's the other thing we talk about a lot, is like the nuance of these very complicated things, but how beautiful it is that we have these movies like Encanto and Turning Red and Elemental and Inside Out and all of these that take very complicated things and make them palatable for not just children but also adults who, at least in my case, grew up not really understanding what was happening and not understanding why I was so angry and what I was looking for, and then finding these movies to give words to it and to just like acknowledge and validate my experience. So speaking of Turning Red, one of the other questions we had was, would you forgive May's mom? So we've talked a little bit about receiving an apology, and now we're talking a little bit about forgiveness. Amber, since you watched the movie most recently
being like, I finished it an hour ago. Yeah. It's really, so would I, as myself, forgive her? I feel like my answer is yes, but I'm also trying to think about it from May's perspective. Oh boy. Oh man, I'm getting emotional all of a sudden. There was a lot that hit home for me in the sense that I do have a bit of a complicated relationship with my own mother. And so my dad died very suddenly a little over 2 years ago now. And I've kind of always been in a little bit of this position where I feel very responsible for making sure my mom's okay, making sure she's happy. Even as I'm literally saying this right now, I'm thinking like, what if she ever listens to this podcast? Am I going to hurt her feelings? Like, that's literally running through my head right now, real time. But to be very honest, I think that there are definitely things that I have not brought up to her or asked her about or even asked for an apology around that I would like acknowledgement around and I would like an apology around, because I want her to be okay and I don't want to like upset her feeling. Like I am like the codependency piece is so strong there, and I've been working through it my whole life. Adult child of an alcoholic. Like it's just like it's one of those pieces. And so I'm just thinking like as a child, is she forgiving her mother because she's like, oh no, it's okay, like it's going to be fine, like don't cry, don't be upset, it's okay? Like, is she doing that parentified child thing where like she's seeing her mom hurt and upset and she just wants to like make things better for her? Or is it from a place of like true understanding, acknowledgement, and forgiveness, right? Because, and I think maybe it goes back to what HB was saying, whereas if the mom follows that apology up with a true change in behavior and relational dynamic, yeah. But if it's just kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, and then like we're going right back to like, you need to get 100 on every test and you need to be first place in every spelling bee and you can't spend time with your friends because, I need you to be essentially my partner in life. Yeah, then maybe like the forgiveness is not really going to stand because there's no change in behavior. But watching it as an adult, and seeing her child self crying in that when they go through, kind of like the portal, it's not her as an adult self that May finds. It's her mom as her child self. And so being able to acknowledge that most people walking around are just wounded children. It doesn't matter what your chronological age is. Like we just get developmentally stuck when we have experienced trauma. And most people have experienced a lot of little t and sometimes even big T trauma. For those who don't know what that is, like big T trauma is, like war, poverty, seeing somebody get killed, things like that. Little T trauma is like you come home every day and your parent is like, oh, you wore that to school. Like, it's kind of like those little microaggressions, if you will, that can add up over time, or having an unstable home environment and not really knowing like, where your next meal is going to come from. Do you have, a parent that's going to be kind to you, or are they going to be unkind to you, or caregiver? So yeah, so I do have a lot of compassion for that as an adult and as a mental health professional. But again, looking at it through the lens of like May, I don't really know if I feel like the appropriate response maybe would have been like, okay, mom, like I see you, I understand, like, let's kind of see where we go from here, and give her the opportunity to actually wait out for a change in behavior before she decides how she wants to move forward in her relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember in the episode when we had talked about it, I had said, long story short, yes, I would forgive her. Also, just like you said, Amber, like me as me, not the daughter of her mom, because I grew up with a mother who was both passively and outrightly mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive and manipulative and all of this stuff. But to me, it didn't seem like May's mom was that outright, was that intentional. She just really wanted May to be a good student, to do well in school, to prepare her to have a good life, basically, because that was what was instilled upon her. So it never seemed on purpose, the things that she was doing. Again, it was just like subconsciously cyclical and just, continuing the cycle. But I really like your point that perhaps it would have been a little bit more realistic if it were more of a conversation of like, I appreciate that we have both recognized this dynamic and this relationship and the pressures that have been placed upon both of us, and let's see how we move forward from here together.
Yeah. And there's the little montage at the end that does give a nod to the fact that the mom has had a change in the way that she interacts with herself and with others. It does look that way, just for the sake of continuity and the conversation. But it does appear that, she really did take that experience to heart, and it was a catalyst to a big change in their relational dynamic and behavior. So hoping for the best for Ming and May.
Yeah.
Amber, that was the same answer that I gave when we asked this question of ourselves in the Turning Red episode. Basically was the exact same thing. Like, if it is followed by change behavior. But LB, you also said something that I'm remembering in that episode, which is that if you need to forgive that person in order to move on, you can also give yourself that you can forgive them to move on yourself. Or it's like that matter of like, if you need that to move on, then do it.
Yeah, in whatever way that you need to, even if it's not a conversation, if you just need to forgive them for your own peace and your own closure, that's okay too. I'm so glad you remembered that. You have such a great memory. Jamie, Kitty, what about you guys? How are you? What do you think? What are your thoughts and feels?
I have a few thoughts and feels. Jamie, I'll let you go first.
Oh gosh. It's been a minute, I will say, that since I've seen the movie. But yeah, I kind of touched on it before, but my mom growing up was kind of definitely not the like you have to get A's and everything, but she was somebody who very much instilled, what's the right word? Traditional female roles and how you should be as a woman and how you should present yourself as a woman. So something like that, I like I said, it created a very up and down relationship between her and I, because as a kid, you're also trying to explore yourself and try to figure out who you are. And when someone is telling you who you should be and you don't feel like, well, that doesn't feel right to me, it just creates that wall between you two. But I think not being in the same situation, but something similar, I did forgive my mother, and it for me personally, it was followed by change behavior, and it worked out in that way. However, I don't think I would ever blame someone if they didn't or weren't able to forgive and forget.
Yeah.
I can feel like the tenderness of this topic. And if anybody needs any regulation or co-regulation, this is who I'm currently sitting next to if you're watching the video. And she's just stretched out this black boy furry baby kitten, and her toes are pushed up against my side. So she's giving us support And for those of you who know the story of like my name, then you know exactly how supportive a furry critter can be, especially when we talk about these types of trauma healing experiences. And I'm digesting everyone's thoughts, and I have a few pieces to share. So I'm going to just go in. And one thing I love that you said, LB, is speaking about the intention of the mother in this film and kind of the intention of those who cause harm in general. And there's a piece here to really consider. Intention is not everything, but I think it's important. And as we learned throughout Turning Red, we learned the intention was to just take really good care of her daughter the way that it made sense to her, in a protective manner, like we're talking about the different pieces that meant for that family. But I want to expand our spectrum here of experiences. Like, yes, we're talking about Turning Red, but thinking about, say, parental experiences or those who've harmed us, there's a bigger spectrum, there's a bigger spiral. And some of us, maybe some of us in this room, maybe some of us listening, have experiences with people, parents, who hurt us on purpose, who intentionally caused harm, especially to children. And that's more aligned with my experience. So when I imagine, say, like giving forgiveness to a parent who was trying their best or had, well-meaning intentions, that feels a little bit different than those of us whose parents hurt us on purpose. And I think that just matters as a piece of this conversation. And then I want to jump around a tiny bit, because I'm reminded of a class I took in graduate school called Forgiveness. So I thought it was really interesting. There's a whole, elective course in my graduate program called Forgiveness, where we read different pieces. We learned about forgiveness on both micro, interpersonal levels and like larger scales, reparations, right? Like societal scales, forgiveness. And at the end of this course, the professor posed a question saying, so after all of this, what do we think? Future therapists and counselors and supporters, do we think that forgiveness is a necessary step or part of the healing journey? I was a little surprised that I think myself and maybe one other person were the only people who said no. So it's so deeply ingrained, I think, in many, dogmas, perspectives, that forgiveness is some essential element. But that's not how I understand it to be. That's not something that I feel like if we don't have that, then the loop isn't connected. And so I want to honor folks in this room, folks who are listening, who maybe don't even identify with this language we're talking about of forgiveness and apology, or maybe haven't thought about it that way. Or even folks like me who I find so much joy and solace in not needing an apology and not even really thinking about it like that, becoming so perhaps like solid in my own identity, my own story that I tell myself, that I know of myself, that the thought of somebody else acknowledging their role no longer really affects me, because I know I have such a deep, I'm smiling because it feels so good that I don't even really use that language anymore of needing an apology, needing changed behavior. That said, I know for me, I do come from kind of extreme circumstances of people not only hurting me on purpose, but pretty extreme trauma, abuse, harm. And so I really just wanted to be that voice for folks who might be closer to those types of experience. And it's okay if an apology not only isn't received, but if it's not something you really conceptualize, desire, think about, or need.
Damn. All I can ever say, Kitty, when you drop these really beautiful nuggets for those people. And I appreciate the wide variety of experiences that we have been getting today, because I think, like you said, Kitty, it's just very validating. And like we've talked about throughout the season and even in this episode, just how validating it is to have our experience acknowledged in some sort of kind of way can be so healing. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. to change gears just a little bit, this could be lighter. It might not be. I don't know. We'll see where the conversation goes. But there were tons and tons of themes that we covered in all of these movies. And I just wanted to open up the floor for y'all to talk about, and some of you have already, so not something we've already discussed, but one of these movies, when you watched it, that gave you an empowering takeaway, and what that empowering takeaway might have been, whether it was healing, mental health, personal development, body image, whatever comes up for you, if there was a time you watched one of these and it gave you something.
I have one off the top of my head.
Yes.
And this is one that I love talking about just in general, but Inside Out, when that came out, I have a long history of anxiety and depression, and it started when I was pretty young. So I can't remember exactly when that movie came out, but it had to be around when I was 13, 14. And I remember months of just like having panic attacks and having these feelings of sadness and dread, and not really understanding where any of this was coming from. And being a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy. Like, I don't know what's happening to me. And I remember watching that movie, and it's not quite the message, but being able to visualize your emotions in your head. And I remember watching, oh my gosh, I'm sorry if I get emotional. I remember that last scene where Riley finally breaks down and like her parents hug her and everything just seems a little lighter. I remember watching that and being like, wow, not everything has to be controlled by me, and not everything is controlled by me.
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to conceptualize that and just release that was so powerful for me, in not having to control my own emotions all the time. And it's not my fault. I love that movie.
I love that. Yeah. One of the things we brought up in the episode where we talk about Inside Out is the depiction of Riley's depression, and how cool it was to see how they showed that happening in her mind, like with the islands of personality disappearing, and with the emotions kind of being like, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, as someone who also struggles with anxiety and depression, I really enjoyed that there was a movie that was showing us this, and they didn't call it such. They didn't call it depression, but they are bringing anxiety apparently for the next one. So we'll have to bring you back on to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I really did love how they showcased what was happening in her mind, and showing that it can happen in someone who is young, because I do think that oftentimes when children are depressed or anxious, it is looked at as something else. And
they're just moody, or they're acting out, or it's just a phase or whatever.
Yeah. And so I liked that it was a little validating, and that we got to kind of see it and physicalize it and be like, yeah, that is how it feels. Like, I do feel like my islands of personality are gone when I'm depressed, and that's exactly what it feels like. So yeah, so I'm glad that Inside Out gave you that experience of release of control over your emotions, because I think that's so huge. And I'm glad that that was your takeaway from it, because you're right, it wasn't necessarily the takeaway of the movie, but it gave you something, and it helped you release a little bit of the pressure that you were putting on yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know we talked about this in the episode too, but what I like specifically around the whole scene of like the board going gray and Riley falling into the depression is that sadness wasn't even at the table. Because I think there's a big misconception that depression is just like feeling really sad, but it's so much more than that. Like, there is a little bit of disgust, there is a lot of anger, a lot of fear, right? And so I as listeners may know, I didn't really necessarily love the movie. It's not one of my favorites, but I do like the conversations that can be started and had because of that movie.
I'm actually with you on like not the biggest fan of Inside Out. I do love the conversations, and I think that they are important. For me, the movie that comes to mind is one that you are hopefully yet to talk about. It's on the list and it looks like you're going to talk about it, but WALL-E is one of my absolute favorite movies. And I like WALL-E is the movie when I'm feeling like I want to just like give up and not keep going with a task or a dream or a project. Like WALL-E's the movie that I turn to because WALL-E did not give up, like did not give up. I think the power of perseverance is just personified so beautifully in WALL-E. There were so many opportunities for WALL-E to just be like, oh, well, things are just getting too hard. Like, that's it. You know, I'm just gonna throw up my little robot hands and just call it a day, turn into my little like cube self and just, you know, like, but WALL-E doesn't do that. And he like the perseverance and just continuing to just keep going, even when the going gets rough, and to find different ways and to be creative and to resource yourself. I think that's where WALL-E didn't really have a ton of help, like, especially when Eve was out of commission, right? Like the odds were really stacked against WALL-E. So I think that it was just one of those things where like a huge takeaway for me for that movie was just think about maybe going down a different road or a different path, or if things look like, you know, they're not going to work out the way that I thought that they were going to, maybe that is them working out the way that they're supposed to. Because I think that that was where, like, you know, WALL-E thought him and Eve were going to just ride off into the sunset together. But here there was this whole thing that looked like it was like throwing a huge wrench in that plan, but it actually was for a bigger purpose and a greater good. And so that, you know, when the life gives you those misdirections, not to necessarily look at them as a negative or a bad thing and fight for control, but maybe just to go with whatever's being presented in front of me and, you know, lean into that with my whole heart.
Yeah, I love that. We have not yet talked about WALL-E. I am very excited to, although by the time this episode comes out, that episode might already be out, question mark.
Yes. Yeah, we're reversing the release, so it will come out before this one. So you'll already hear our thoughts about WALL-E before hearing this. But we haven't talked about it yet. Amber, you saying that makes me really excited to watch it again. I have not seen it in years, like pretty much since it came out. I worked at a movie theater when it came out and saw it multiple times at the movie theater where I worked, but I don't think I've seen it since. And one of my really good friends at the movie theater was obsessed with Eve and the way that WALL-E says,
like, so Eva. Because it sounds like WALL-E's saying Eva, but it's actually Eve, but he's like, Eva.
Yeah,
it's so cute.
And the little cockroach is also my favorite. Like the little cockroach friend. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like for a minute when I thought that the cockroach was squished, I was like, no. But
oh my God,
cockroach, he's gonna survive. He's gonna go.
No,
survive anything.
I'm so excited to talk about that episode. Heather and I were just talking about it because she hasn't seen it in a while. And one of the big themes is hope. And especially given some of the things happening in the world today, I find a lot of comfort and solace in that movie. So yeah, I'm very excited to chat about it.
Oh my gosh, this conversation is so beautiful. I love how we're holding space for all of the like evolutions of these pieces. And I just want to hold space also for what you were just saying, LB, or alluding to. And for those in the room or those listening who believe in, you know, the power of manifestation or asking the universe for what we want, I would love for by the time that this airs for there to be some justice and ceasefire for Palestinians and those in Gaza, and also, you know, movement towards supporting folks in Congo and other parts of the world that are suffering. So I just want to name that. And I feel like that connects with this piece around WALL-E. Absolutely. And what happens if we continue in the other direction? What happens if we continue trending towards violence, exploitation, colonization, abusing the earth and each other? Then the future in Wall-E, or at least the future for the Earth side, may not look great. And I say that in future when it is also present, it is also past, it is happening. So I welcome y'all to hold that intention and aspiration.
Thank you for naming that, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And just kind of bouncing around, LB, you got a few folks on your side here a little bit with Inside Out. I'm just gonna throw that in there, just a little bit. It's beautiful. It provides a lot of language and imagery for folks. I think that's awesome, but I also see a lot of opportunities to take it even further. But that also tends to align with my like extreme. Like I want us to get even better in our ability to conceptualize our experiences, and maybe even categorizing with labels. Maybe that's not exactly the move, or like making it a workplace. I have thoughts around that. Like capitalism coming in. I'm like, stop that.
I didn't even think about that.
Right? No, see, this is my lens that I like tend to bring through. But one of the pieces that that come to mind for me, going back to the movie we've talked about a little bit today, Encanto, is Bruno. And Bruno, I know that he has a sweet spot, or hits a sweet spot for so many of us, but I really am so happy to see representation through Bruno. This may come as a surprise for folks, or may not, but I really identify with Bruno as a person, as someone who doesn't fit in the mold, as someone who we might describe as like neurodiverse and unique in their expressions, and someone who is really misunderstood. And so when I watched the journey of Bruno, I received healing through that journey, especially as someone who had been estranged. And so maybe I might steer us in a different direction, because I wonder if any of you have any experience with, we're talking a lot about family, bio-family today, family of origin, with being estranged from folks, either, you're being, say, cut off or cutting off others. I have a lot of experience with that myself. Folks who've been with me from the beginning know I actually have some restraining orders, some no contact orders against immediate bio-family. That's something I'm very familiar with. And so in some ways, it was beautiful to see an example of estrangement that really like got to come back together in such a beautiful way. And I wish that for a lot of us. It's not going to happen for a lot of us as well. It's not how my story is going, but it still felt so supportive to like watch that, to see somebody who was outcast, and it actually was a misunderstanding, and to be welcomed back and reunite is so precious. Oh my gosh, it gets me every time.
Yeah, I do relate to Bruno, although not to the extent that you do, Kitty, but as far as like kind of being the black sheep of the family, quote unquote, and just being the oddball. My family is very conservative and traditional, and I am very much not, for better or for worse. And I remember, though, that one of the conversations my parents and I had when I had wanted to move out is that they were saying, well, once you move out, you're cut off. And at 18 years old, that's like terrifying to hear about, right? Like I was going to school. I couldn't hold down a job. I didn't have the resources or capability to be, quote unquote, on my own yet. And so that kind of fear, that fear mongering instilled this idea that I was like trapped, like I was stuck, like I couldn't leave this environment until X, Y, and Z. And just like we talked about at the beginning, there were so many things in my life that overlapped around like waiting. And then finally, this was the one and only, I don't want to say only, but this was one of the few times that I kind of spoke up about it, against it. And I was like, but why? Why is it this way? Why does it have to be that way? It was a conversation around like, well, that's the way like it's always been, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it was a conversation I had with my dad, and I could see that it like pained him to say that, and he didn't want that. And I was like, so then why are we even doing this? Why is this a thing? Anyway, long story short, I did move out. I wasn't necessarily cut off, but there is not, like, moving out didn't necessarily fix things. Things are better in the sense that my mental health is significantly improved, and I have better control about when I interact with them. But I would love to have my little Bruno moment where I am accepted fully for who I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And that's why
I will
you have
say,
us.
I was gonna say, yep. I am very grateful to have people in my life like Amber and Kitty and HB, and hopefully, hi Jamie now, and just other people in my life. I have a really great group of friends. Like, Chosen Family is my jam. Any movie about it, I just like am in tears. Any TV show. I think that's why I like Star Wars so much. Anyway, so in some ways I have gotten that, right? We've talked a lot about like getting what you need out of certain things, and I've definitely gotten the being fully accepted for who I am through my friends, and that has helped me better accept myself for who I am, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean,
We love
have
you.
Thank
yeah,
you.
we do. We have talked, as Kitty brought up, we've talked a lot about family of origin, and we do have to wrap up soon, but I do think it's important to bring up that there are heavy themes throughout this season of Chosen Family and finding people who support you for who you are, no matter what, and showing up as your authentic self, and that Chosen Family is just as important, if not more important, than your actual family too. And I love that from some of the movies that we watched and talked about this season, is that big theme. You know, it's really big in Toy Story, it's really big in Luca, it's big in a lot of the movies that we talked about, just like finding those people who surround you and support you no matter what, and they might not be blood of origin, but they are who you think of when you hear the word family. So I just wanted to say that. But before we do go, I just want to give you the floor if there is a movie or a theme that you really wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to really dive deep on, to bring that up now before we wrap up. Oh my goodness.
I'll mention the one film that we didn't get into a lot today, but is also just so beautiful and precious, is Coco. And actually, I had a moment here of the contrast between like the elder, like Coco in Coco, and like say the elder in Encanto, and you know, just thinking about the different ways that we age, first of all, and experience life, but also the ways we respond to those who are our elders. And then there's so much more about Coco, so that just holds such a precious place in my heart. And as a spiritual person, some of you might be like nodding like, yes, this makes sense. There's a whole journey to be had, and I just love that one. It lives in my heart.
And I just think with a lot of these Pixar movies, very specifically, there is such a huge theme of being true to yourself despite adversity, right? And I think it comes from family, it comes from society, it comes from expectations. Like each of these movies, there's all of these kind of different challenges or struggles, and more often than not, they are overcome or moved through by the protagonist essentially tuning in and aligning with their deepest truth and finding out that the power or the magic or, you know, the key to unlocking something or moving through something or solving a problem has been within themselves the entire time. And I just think that that is such an important reminder. And there are so many of these movies where it's hard, right? It's hard for the main character to do that, and they're blocked from it for one of those reasons. But through having friends, right? Like chosen family, through having guides, through essentially reaching out for help and having those other folks or, characters that are able to reflect their truth back to them. They're more clearly able to see themselves because there are other people who are helping them to see themselves in their truth. And so I think that just kind of brings me back to what LB was saying, just about find those people, right? Like if you're having a really tough time seeing yourself or figuring things out or feeling very solid in your truth, find the people who are accurate reflections of, your deepest self. And I tell my clients a lot that everyone is a mirror, right? But sometimes there are dirty mirrors, and sometimes there are funhouse mirrors, and sometimes there are beautiful, crystal clear mirrors where you can really have your true self reflected back to you. And that's the tough part, right? Like understanding like, okay, is this like a murky, cloudy, distorted version of me that this person is reflecting back to me because of their own stuff? Or are they reflecting back to me and amplifying, my truth? That's where, discernment comes in, and you have to really tap into your own intuition and your own heart and trusting, how you feel when you're in relationship to that other person. Because I think we also see that in several of these movies where there's people that are kind of trying to like pull, that character in a direction to kind of get them off course. And then there's people that are kind of like helping them to grow into themselves. So I think that's just kind of like a big theme for me looking at all of these that I just wanted to name and bring up as we kind of wrap things up this evening.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. All right.
I might have just one more piece to add.
Okay.
Especially reflecting off of what Amber shared. I love this trend we're seeing in these movies of moving from that hyper independence towards community. And I hope we can continue having examples of how to do that, whether we call it chosen family, community, culture, right? This innate truth that we are not alone. And especially in the mental health world, many of us know just how important that is. And I love that we got to do some of that today amongst ourselves, and also with all those who are listening and really feeling and being in this with us.
Yeah.
Thank you, our guests, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for having been with us through however many episodes, even if this is your first. Thank you for being here as well. And before we end this episode, we would love to give you all a chance to share where people may be able to find you, social media handles, etc., etc.
On everything, I am Jamie Bear Fancy Pants. It's a bit of a mouthful. But again, I do cosplay, I do acting. I'm trying to get back into streaming, so we'll see how that goes.
Fun. Kitty, go ahead.
Yes, you can find me on the socials, on Insta, TikTok, Threads. Threads are popping off, so if y'all are Thread folks, please come find me. Let's connect. I'm at the Kitty Caveat. My website is also thekittycaveat.com. Ways that we can connect: if you're in Washington State and are looking for a trauma-focused, spiritual, queer therapist, that could be me. Feel welcome to check out my website, and we might connect through therapy. If not, I love coaching folks, and I can coach and mentor folks globally, which I also love very much. And I do in real life, I was like, IRL events in the Seattle area. So keep an eye out for those if you're local to me up here in the Pacific Northwest. But I also love hosting workshops, and I'm starting to build some communities online that I'll be revealing this summer. I also do my creative pieces, my art, some music, and some writing. So that's why I especially love supporting my fellow creative folks. And if you just want to be in a space where we talk about things like this, we hold space for hard things and beautiful things, please come follow me and let's get to know each other.
Yay. Amber.
So I'm mostly hang out on Instagram. I'm an elder millennial, so that's just
I feel you.
that's just where I am. I'm at ambergordon.official. It's GORDON.official. That is also my website. And I am a little bit on Facebook, but mostly if you want to connect, it's going to be Instagram. I also have a podcast. It is the Sacred Leadership Podcast. So if you are into leadership and hearing stories from people who are essentially stepping up in leadership and how they found their way to that, I would love to have you. We are on Spotify, Apple, Google, pretty much anywhere you want to get your podcast, it's over there. Right now, my focus and passion is supporting the people who are supporting people. So if you are a therapist, if you are a coach, if you are a healer or a helper, ceremony facilitator, space holder, I would love to hold space for you, support you. I do that using a blend of shadow work, nervous system regulation, mindfulness techniques, and a little touch of some narrative techniques in there. And I just think that now more than ever, the people who are here to help support the healing really, 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 really need to be supported, because they are carrying a lot and they have a very important calling. So it is my honor to step into that space and hold space for the people who hold space for others. So if that sounds like you, come and just say hi and we'll see if we're maybe a good fit. If not, I too am also working on a community for exactly those people who are, supporting others in a ethical and aligned, trauma-informed way. So I love Kitty's word, reveal. I will also be revealing that soon. I have sparkle nails like for like right now. They're very sparkly. So I feel like it's extra jazz hands, like reveal.
Your theater kid is coming out for sure.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, for our returning guest, and for our new guest. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, for being vulnerable and open and honest and authentic. This is technically the last episode of the season. So listeners, thank you. HB, thank you. Love you. This has been so much fun. Just lights me up, makes my soul and my heart very, very happy. And I can't wait to continue doing this.
Yeah, we'll be back in the fall with a new season. Should we announce what our season is going to be? We're gonna reveal. It is Disney villains.
Get your reveal hands.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Disney villains coming up in the fall. And if you miss us, you can always join our Patreon for exclusive content, bonus episodes, bloopers, all that fun stuff. So have a good summer, everyone. Thank you again to our guests, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast, and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebin_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.